up some transportation issues today. Our first order of business before we begin is to call the roll and establish a quorum.
Senator Simidian.
Here.
Senator Cogdill.
Here.
Senator Lowenthal.
Here.
All right, thank you. And are any of you in the room here predominantly for the high-speed rail issue? Okay. We will be getting to that item, as you can see, as the fourth or fifth but final item on our agenda. My expectation is that the other items that precede it will probably take somewhere between an hour and a half. We may take a break at that time, just to both clear the room and also to let members return phone calls and or grab a quick bite to eat. But let's see how long it takes as we go. And then we'll take up the high-speed rail items at that time. So we'll keep you posted as we make our way through the agenda. And on the high-speed rail items, when we get to those, there's one vote-only item which I think we can take up pretty quickly, and then what I'm going to suggest to the members at that time is that we hear public testimony first on any and all items related to high-speed rail, and that then we march through the items one by one by one. That will allow both folks from the High-Speed Rail Authority as well as Finance and the LAO to have heard any public commentary before we begin that process. But right now, we have some other issues in the agenda, and the first one deals with the motor vehicle account, and this has to do with the potential for a $72 million transfer from the motor vehicle account in the non-Article 19 categories, we refer to it, to the general fund as a one-time action. Who's here to present on this?
Catherine Ava, Department of Finance.
All right. And what do you think?
Well, with some of the proposals or some of the things that are happening now with furloughs and the proposals for budget year for workforce reduction and other employee comp adjustments, the MVA is in good condition. We know that there are some risks and pressures out there, but frankly, multiple things would have to happen for it to not be in good condition in the near term. So we do concur with the numbers that the consultant has in the agenda. Okay.
Does the administration have a position on the recommendation formally?
We don't have a position on the recommendation. We're still looking at May revision proposals. Also, we will be updating the MVA numbers in May revision, but I don't know that they're going to change that much.
All right. LAO, any comments from the LAO's office on this item?
Russia Chavez with the Legislative Analyst's Office. We do agree with the consultant's information that he's provided to you. Additional, there may be more savings than what's listed here, because in this projection that we've received from the Department of Finance, they haven't included the 5% employee compensation reduction that's in there as well. So there may be additional savings.
All right. Let me just, before we bring the matter up to the committee, let me see if there are members of the public who would like to speak on this issue. If not, committee members have a point of view. Sergeant, could we ask you to turn the air up just a little bit? I know it feels cool now, but we're going to be here a while, and it looks like we're going to have a full house. So, thank you.
I'd like to move the staff recommendation.
All right. Senator Cogdill, any thoughts before we move to a vote?
No.
All right. Call the roll.
Simidian.
Aye.
Cogdill. No. Lowenthal. Aye.
All right, then. Thank you very much. That takes us to some CHP issues. We have some vote-only issues here. Typically, as members know, we simply move straight to these on a vote-only basis without debate or discussion, unless there is a member of the public or someone from the agency or Finance or LAO who thinks they would like to take a moment to raise an issue. Do we have anyone who has any issues to raise on these four vote-only items that are on pages 4 and 5 of our published agenda? Last call. All right, then can we get a motion on issues 1 through 4 on agenda pages 4 and 5, vote only? We have a motion from Senator Cogdill. Call the roll.
Simidian.
Aye.
Cogdill. Lowenthal. Aye.
All right, then. That takes us to item number 5, which is the CHP Enhanced Radio System. We have the governor's budget and capital outlay BCPs 1 and 2. And we'll say welcome and ask you to introduce yourselves.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members. I'm Joe Farrow. I'm the Commissioner of the California Highway Patrol.
Kevin Green, I'm Assistant Commissioner with the California Highway Patrol.
All right. Looks like things are moving along reasonably well and under budget. Anything else that we ought to know that's not already in our published materials?
The only thing that we feel we could add is that this is a program that started out 5 years ago, 5-year program, just under $500 million. It's going to come in under budget by about $131 million. It remains on schedule. It's a program heavily engaged in technology, run by a department in cooperation with the Chief Information Officer's Office as well as DGS. And we would just like to say that we think it sets an example that the departments in the state of California can run large IT projects and do them successfully.
Which has been a question from time to time. Excuse me. As the staff report notes, it says the project will enhance radio interoperability with other public safety agencies and provide additional radio channels for tactical and emergency operations. This issue of interoperability in a regional or statewide emergency is obviously an important one. Do we feel like we're making the kind of progress on that piece of the project that we need to make so that if there is a really tragic circumstance that we're ready to go and that various agencies can talk to one another?
The program focused initially on operability. We had a radio system that had been built back in the 60s, and our first goal was simply to create a system that could survive into the future. But the second goal was interoperability, and it's been achieved at multiple levels. It's been achieved at the officer level, so for the first time, a CHP officer who's at an incident can get on their handheld radio and actually talk to that sheriff's deputies on their radio frequency who's only 100 feet up from them. I'm sure you can appreciate the benefits of that during tactical operations, pursuits, searches. We also have interoperability achieved at the dispatch level. So the dispatch centers, as well as the department, can now interconnect with agencies at the local level and as well as the federal level. So during the disasters that most assuredly will befall California in the future, we will have the ability for the state agencies to communicate with their fellow emergency response partners.
All right. As someone who lives and works in the San Francisco Bay Area, in the 9-county Bay Area, I think we have something like 100 local government agencies. The worry, of course, is always that there'll be another earthquake and that the next one will be more severe than the ones we've had in the recent past. Really a simple sort of, ground level question. Will the police departments in all those jurisdictions be able to talk to the fire departments in all those jurisdictions who will need to be able to talk to hospital and emergency response teams from all those jurisdictions when the time comes?
Interoperability still has a ways to go. So it's difficult for me. I'm very familiar with the Bay Area. Departments are at different levels of interoperability. I will say this, since 2001, most law enforcement agencies, emergency response agencies, are light years from where they were in terms of liability. I think the answer to your question, the simple answer is yes. Interoperability has been achieved by so many. Contra Costa County initiated a plan. San Francisco implemented a plan. FEMA came in and provided oversight and some guidance. I think the simple answer is yes. We will be able to communicate amongst the multiple response partners.
If somebody asked you the question, so what more could we do or should we do if the resources were available with respect to the interoperability, what's the next logical step in your judgment?
The most logical step is one that's already being worked on, and it's being chaired by FEMA, and it has to do with the guidance document for agencies to implement interoperability so that monies are not wasted, so that we use similar technologies and we use open architecture technologies. We follow the guidelines that have been established by the federal government, all of us, so that when a system is purchased and leveraged by an individual government, agreement, that it can be, we're assured of interoperability, not just today, but when an agency goes buys a system in the future, that we know in advance that it will be able to connect to whatever investment has already been made by the state, by the feds, or by the locals.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Senator Lowenthal.
Yeah, it's very impressive that you were able to reduce this project's, the cost from $491 million down to $360 of the savings. And it was said that, here in the report, that it was because the project was down-scoped to be able to do that. Can you explain how you really were able to accomplish these savings, and did we give up anything in accomplishing these savings?
I want to state from our perspective that the downscoping of the project, which I'll explain in a moment, is not where the savings were really derived from. Because at the end of the downscoping, we remained at $491 million.
Okay.
The patrol came in with a plan initially, one that had been developed at that time in cooperation with the Department of General Services. And the plan was perhaps overly ambitious. And specifically, when we began to find out the condition of the microwave path that's owned by the state of California, it was in greater disrepair than perhaps any of us thought. So we quickly learned that the money that we had requested would not be enough to address that. So we rescoped the project to remain within the allotted funding and still accomplish the primary goals: achieve operability, better radio system, but leverage the state's investment that already existed. And that's the number one savings that I can point to. We leveraged what the state already owned. We didn't buy a new system. We simply enhanced the radio system we had, rather than throw everything away and buy a new system. New system would have cost us perhaps 3, 4, or greater times what we invested here. The other savings come predominantly from competitive bidding, working closely with our partners, and part of it is from design build. It's being open to the fact that this is a 5-year project that is, technology changes almost daily. So we were open to the technology that was changing. And we listened to the vendors. We listened to our partners out there, and I'm talking about our local partners and our federal partners. And we leveraged the investment that they made. And I believe that's where the savings ultimately comes from.
You see this as a model?
Oh, I absolutely. If I'm not displaying some pride, I absolutely see it as a model.
Thank you.
Senator
You're
Cogdell,
to
any
be
questions?
congratulated.
All right, thank you. Excuse me. Do we have a motion to approve the staff recommendation?
I approve the budget request.
All right. Call the roll.
Semidion.
Aye.
Cogdill. Aye. Lowenthal. Aye.
All right. That takes us to item number 6, officer staffing augmentation. BCP number 18, budget change proposal number 18. And why don't we ask CHP to begin by updating us, if you could, on the 600 new officer positions that have been approved by the legislature over the past, I guess it's 4 years now, and what the public safety benefits have been in your view of that augmentation.
Thank you, sir. The 600 officers that we had, the first goal to receive those officers was to go full 24/7 operation throughout the state of California. And at the same time, we were trying to enhance our ability to recruit and retain and train all these officers coming into the system. And I'm happy to report that we've been able to do that. We've been able to hire every officer, also clear the backlog that we had prior to coming in and asking for these requests, and accomplish the 24/7 operation. As we moved forward, we started to put these officers now out throughout the state of California. In preparation for speaking here today, we took a real quick look at about 10 of the area offices at random that we put 8 officers in. And I think what's important there is that in every category that we look at where the numbers should go down, they went down. In every category they should go up, they went up. And as an example, I can tell you that fatal accidents and all these commands went down some 25%. And that number really goes throughout the entire state. Drunk driving arrests, down. Injury accidents, down. Arrests for drunk driving, up. Citations for aggressive speeding and texting and cell phones and all those things that we do for distracted driving, up. Calls for service, up. Our motorist services, the services that we provide, this is in the state of California, up dramatically in many of those categories. And I think what we've been able to show, if you just look at California right now today, the measuring stick that we use in California to look at fatal accidents is the mileage death rate. It's the number that we use against 100 million miles traveled. When we came on the highway patrol years and years and years ago, that number floated in the high 1.5s, the 1.6s. And there was a belief by a lot of people that that number would be very, very difficult to get down to the 1.0 mark. A lot of people believe that we'd never be able to crush that threshold. And if things keep going the way they are right now, and if we can keep employing the practices that we have and doing the things we have, we're going to break that barrier this year. We're confident of that. We think that number will come in somewhere at 0.095, 0.96, which what that relates to the public, relates to people. There are hundreds of lives that are being saved each and every year, hundreds of lives that are saved. Just this last year alone, we were able to drop the numbers down to hundreds, and really over the 600 positions that you've given us over the last 3 to 4 years, there's over 734 lives that were saved. And I don't even really have to get into the debate of what the economic benefits of that really are. Now, moving forward just a little bit, the 180 bodies that we have here that we're going to debate today, we can show you statistically that what that means. That means that we're going to be removing an additional 350 officers off, 350 drunk drivers off the road on a monthly basis. We're going to respond to 1,000 more crashes. We're going to respond to thousands of citizens who are stranded out on the roadways that we have to go to. We're going to help 500 to 700 more times allied agencies that need our assistance out there. And these would be these officers that we are going to hire here today, hopefully. And so the benefits, I think, really kind of speak for themselves. And I'll close and I'll open it for questions, is that the staffing study that we have talked about for really a couple of years now is completed. It is done. And we have every intention of giving that report to the panel today, to the LAO, and let you take a look at that and really take a critical look at it and look at the methodology that was used to come to where we are today that clearly demonstrates the need for the Hive Patrol to continue to be able to expand, to be able to do our safety mission.
Thank you, Commissioner. You've anticipated most of my questions, so let me ask LAO and Finance whether they have any questions or comments to offer at this point.
We don't have any questions or comments, so we'll look forward to seeing the report and reviewing it with the administration and staff.
So always wise to show up with the report you know is going to be requested. That's Senator Cogdill.
Thank you. The only question I would have, I guess, is how we rank among other states as it relates to the number of CHP that we have per population, or how the statistics rank as it relates to the number of officers that we have.
I can tell you in bulk numbers, the California Highway Patrol is the largest state police organization of the 49 states that have a state patrol. Hawaii does not have one. In terms of ratio to population, I don't have that number right in front of me, but I can tell you that maybe the best way to explain it is that the patrol for years and years and years was underfunded in a way where we didn't have sufficient officers. We were way behind the growth of California. We were way behind the ratio to licensed drivers to registered vehicles and really the citizens of California. And what we've been able to accomplish over the last couple of years, we've been able to close that gap in such a way where we're really performing our duties the way we think they should. But I don't have a number for you in terms of the ratio of how we rate to another state in terms of population to that. But I can tell you for the longest time we were far behind some of the other states.
Excuse me, Senator, if I can interrupt. Commissioner, if we could ask you to provide sometime in the next couple of weeks, if it's available, I'm sure the information is readily available, some kind of a comparison just to give us a ballpark assessment of how California does compare with other states based on population, based on number of licensed drivers, based on highway miles, just so we can sort of get a rough yardstick and see how we're doing.
Okay, I'll certainly supply that. The one disclaimer I'd like to offer before that is that not every one of the state patrols do the exact same mission as our patrol, so the missions are different. And the jurisdictions are different, and we'll try to explain that as we go through.
Our laws are very different too, aren't they? Traffic laws and drunk driving laws, and
There are many standardizations, but yeah, there are different ways of going about this business.
All right, thank you. Then the staff recommendation, which I think is appropriate as we're working through some of these budget issues, is to keep this item open until we've had time to take a look at the staffing study, and we will have a chance now that the document's available for LAO and Finance and the committee and individual member staff. Senator Lowenthal?
Yeah, I have one question. You mentioned with the additional, and I think I heard you correct, with the additional 180 officers, you anticipated taking 350 drunk drivers, you said. How does that translate in terms of saving lives if we can eliminate 350.
Well, I think the way we look at it is that I don't think there's any disagreement in this room or anywhere that the impaired driver, the drunk driver, is a hazard to all of us who operate the emergency.
We just adjourned in the memory of the loss
And so,
just today.
if we can remove 350 drivers, actually the number is 360. I was off by 10. 360 more drunk drivers per month, and you rate that out to some 3,000, 4,000 per year. Each one of those drivers has the potential of causing harm not only to themselves or to somebody else in the motoring public. So really what we're doing is we're trying to limit the exposure of the innocent people who use our highways, at the same time trying to protect those who drive impaired to get them stopped before they crash or they hurt somebody else. And so it's a simple numbers game. If you can remove 4,000, then the odds are a little bit better for all of us.
All right. We'll hold this item open pending the opportunity to review the staffing study. Thank you, Commissioner. That takes us to item number 7, Homeland Security Augmentation and License Plate Recognition System. Let me just say up front, I've got some privacy concerns and questions about the license plate recognition system. So, and I hope that you were advised of that in advance. Did not want to spring those on you suddenly. And let me just start by observing, I don't think this issue has been discussed here in the Budget Subcommittee. Am I missing anything here in terms of a history on this? And I don't think it's been addressed at a policy level legislatively. Have I missed among the 5,000 bills that move through the system?
It has not been addressed in the policy.
Says the chairman of the Transportation Committee. So then, let's talk about what is this budget request proposed to fund, and how does the system work, and what are the purposes here? And then let's just talk a little bit about some of the privacy challenges.
Well, the license plate reader technology is one that the patrol's been using since around 2005. It is used by agencies nationwide. In its most simplistic statement, it has the capability to rapidly read a license plate and run it against a database to determine whether that vehicle is a wanted vehicle. It alerts the operator of the enforcement vehicle. It also alerts the operator of parking enforcement uses it extensively to determine vehicles that haven't paid their numerous parking citations. So it's used for different purposes. But in its simplest form, that's what it's doing. It's reading license plates and it's running it against a database.
Okay, let me interrupt you because I want to take a step back and sort of start with an even simpler set of building blocks, if I may. How many of these does the CHP have today?
We have 19 mobile units.
Okay, and then that anticipates my second question, and they're all mobile units, is that right?
No, there are fixed units, and we have just 4 fixed units.
And let me just, because I think the fixed units will be simpler for purposes of this conversation for a moment. So there's a fixed unit. It's not confidential. Can you tell me where one of them is?
One of them is sitting on Interstate 10 in the Barstow area.
Okay, so on Interstate 10 in Barstow, and is it by the side of the road? Is that what we're talking about?
It's mounted, the cameras, which is literally what they are sitting on a overhead across the various lanes. So there is a detector that sits over each lane that's reading the plates.
Okay. And is that is that function performed by CHP personnel, or is it under contract with a private entity?
It is performed by CHP only.
Okay. And I apologize because I'm gonna really dig down in the weeds in this one because this is of interest and importance in my judgment. So to grossly oversimplify, there's an overhead over the highway. There's a camera on it. It's a video camera, or it takes multiple stills.
It is taking a still.
Okay. And how many stills does it take a day?
Thousands.
Thousands of stills.
Every vehicle literally every vehicle, as it passes the reader is looking at the plate. If there is a front plate, it's detecting the plate and running it against the known database.
And I'm guessing that this is digital, that you're not running off to the 1 hour Photoshop here to produce these.
That is correct, sir.
Okay. And where is that information then transmitted from the overhead to a remote location?
It is, to the CHP dispatch center.
Okay. And that's where, and then does someone observe them manually, or is there a more sophisticated technology that's put to use to ascertain potential issues?
It could be viewed manually, but it's more automated than that. If the system detects a stolen vehicle, and predominantly it's used by the patrol for the recovery of stolen vehicles. In fact, about 1,600 stolen vehicles have been recovered to date. 600 people arrested. The system will alert the dispatcher that it has a possible match to the stolen vehicle system. The dispatcher then will run the match to confirm that this is in fact a wanted vehicle. Then they'll look at the image that has been captured. It's a red vehicle, so they'll alert dispatch or alert the officers that we have a stolen vehicle with this license plate. Here's the make and here's the color of the vehicle, and it passed the sensor at this time.
So, and the recognition and match is initially done technologically, not manually. In the system, there's a list of stolen vehicle license plate numbers, and the camera has the ability, and the camera system has the ability to read the numbers and match that against your list of stolen vehicles and say, here's a match. Yes?
That is correct.
Okay. So the pictures get taken. That information is then stored in a database at the local field office in the fixed case?
Stored in a server.
In the server. Where's the server?
The server sits behind the firewall at various locations, the CHP. The CHP has a distributed wide area network, so we have servers that are predominantly located at area offices, the various commands of the CHP. The central hub is here in Sacramento.
Any of them out of state?
No.
Okay. How long do you keep that data?
72 hours.
Pursuant to state law, state regulation, internal policy?
CHP policy.
How long has that been your policy, if I may ask?
It has been our policy almost the entire time we've had LPR. We believe that 72 hours was sufficient for us to become aware of the fact that there had been a child abduction, there's been a armed robbery, so that it could be used for other investigative purposes. After 72 hours, the system automatically purges itself of the data.
Okay. Who has access to the information?
The California Highway Patrol. Within the California Highway Patrol would be obviously the dispatchers who could see the data at the point that it's being transmitted. The actual database is accessible by our technology staff as well as a small staff at headquarters who oversees the program.
How about just any of your many officers?
To answer that question, the database itself, the officers can't really look at. What an officer can go back and look at during the course of their shift, and this is really in the mobile situation, they can see the plates and the images that were captured during the course of their shift.
Let me try the question in a slightly different way. What's to prevent an officer, and not to impugn any of your officers, I'm talking hypotheticals here. What's to prevent an officer from accessing the system to track the movements of his ex-wife?
The officer would be unable to put into the database. I'll start with that. The officer would be unable to enter into the database that plate so that search could even begin. The officer would have to know where the vehicle is located and then drive by it, and the reader would read it, but that would be it.
Well, let me try it again.
Okay.
Let's suppose that the officer's got an ex-wife. He's jealous, wonders if she's going to see her new boyfriend, and wants to know whether or not she's gone by that location at Highway 10 in Barstow because that's where the boyfriend is. So is there an ability then is there some way that the officer can access the information to see whether or not his ex-wife is frequently making that particular trip past that particular location to get to the boyfriend?
The answer is no.
Okay. And tell me what would stop the officer from doing that?
The database would be retrievable by the command at headquarters. They'd have to.
So that means somebody would know. Is that what you're?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
And there is protocol within the CHP as to how this 72-hour data hold can be accessed. There has to be a valid investigative purpose. Okay. So even another agency that contacts us, they must confirm that we have an armed robbery that occurred on this date, and we believe that the vehicle may have been on Interstate 10, and we'd like to see if the vehicle passed your location.
You've anticipated my next question, which I appreciate, which is, under what circumstances is this information shared or sold to anyone other than the California Highway Patrol?
It is never sold, and it is only shared with other law enforcement agencies who have a valid, describable investigative purpose. So in other words, we're going to want a case number or something else that tells us that you are legitimately conducting an investigation that would warrant access.
Okay.
If I could add just one element, anticipating questions, the CHP is unique in the way that it developed and created its LPR system. The database is a CHP database. We don't allow the system to randomly access the California law enforcement telecommunications system, where wants and warrants are typically kept. We create our own database. We pull the DOJ database for the stolen vehicle system. We pull only the plates down and load it into the CHP database. That's how we know exactly what's been entered into that database. We know that an officer hasn't entered his wife's vehicle in there to have it tracked. We know what's being captured. So it's not looking for everything. It's looking predominantly for stolen vehicles. Although we may very well put in there an Amber Alert when we have a plate. We'll add it to the database so that we could see if that vehicle is passing any of our locations.
When you indicate that the information is not sold and that the information is only shared with other agencies pursuant to a particular set of requirements, is that also written in policy as opposed to being a custom and practice?
Looking at staff, the answer is yes.
Okay. Nice to know somebody's got your back. And then let me sort of jump to the chase here in terms of what the concern is. I think you can understand there'd be a concern about a police agency having a database of citizen movements for perfectly benign behavior, constitutional right to travel, and a particular concern when that information is amassed over a period of time. We're having the same conversation in Senator Lowenthal's committee about the retention of toll data and movement data that toll collection agencies are amassing. Well, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to ask you to work with. First of all, let me just say I think your 72 hours is a good practice and good for you. I think the sort of the simplest way to deal with some of these issues and the potential for abuse or misuse is to simply purge the data on a timely basis. And it sounds like you're doing that in 72 hours, and that sounds like a good practice. So thank you for that. I'd like to ask you to work with our committee staff and with any of the other members if they're interested to talk about what your policies and procedures are here. Understand and acknowledge that there's some real utility, but there are also some real risks in terms of privacy and civil liberties issues if this isn't handled well. I want to consider the possibility that some of your policies might more appropriately be incorporated in budget language so that if funds are authorized, there's a commitment in statute to enshrine some of these behaviors or the policy of freestanding policy legislation separately. I'm not trying to make this more complicated than it has to be, but administrations change, personnel changes over time, and like to make sure that there's some commitment that we aren't moving to a system with what is ultimately proposed to be 100 mobile systems here, recording, documenting, keeping at length, and then inappropriately sharing or accessing essentially personal information about the public's general movements. That would be troubling to me. Other questions on this issue, Senator Lowenthal? Senator Cogdill, please.
Thank you. I wanted to just clarify a little bit on the purging process, the 72 hours and the sharing of data and how that works. When the data is purged, is it completely removed, irretrievable in any way, shape, or form from the system, or is it downloaded in some file somewhere? So it's no longer active in the system, but it can be retrieved. And if that's the case, I mean, we're seeing more and more of this on a lot of these different cold cases that are coming to light now, and it's pretty amazing when you watch these shows what they find out people are doing. Recorded telephone conversations, where they were with the security cameras, credit card use, whatever it happens to be. They can pretty much tell where you are every minute of the day, it seems, and what you're doing. And I'm just wondering if this kind of thing can be used in cold cases or that would be beyond the 72-hour limit. If someone called you and said, we need to know whether or not this certain vehicle was on this stretch of road at this period of time, 3 weeks ago, a year ago, whatever, could they get that information from you?
Well, the answer is technically no. But I have to provide a caveat. The answer is no. The data is deleted from the system, so it is technically unrecoverable by a user. But I mean, I have to be honest. The way that the question was phrased, a forensic expert could go in, as they can with virtually any data. Right. And probably recover portions of that data that has not yet been overwritten on the server hard drive. But the patrol would never authorize that. The patrol or the data under our policy is no longer accessible. If you contact us after 72 hours, the data, you would be told that the data is
but
unavailable.
If such a forensic search was ordered by a court, you'd have to comply to that, right?
That is true. If absolutely, if we were under subpoena, we would have to forensically attempt to do what the court told us to do.
And the data is there; it's available.
The data is there, and I most assuredly do not profess to be a technical expert. But with that being said, I would have to say only portions of the data would be accessible. As the chair has mentioned, if that is a concern, we most surely could look at how the data is overwritten and apply a Department of Defense standard, which is one of the highest standards you could apply, to overwrite the data almost immediately, to preclude the data from ever being available, to make it unavailable, period.
Senator Cogdill, I mean, this is an interesting discussion in my view because it shows the tension between the concern about bona fide law enforcement utility with the concern about privacy, which is a fundamental constitutional right in California, and civil liberties issues. I think you actually were expressing some concern that useful data might have disappeared and no longer be accessible. I don't want to infer incorrectly.
Well, I think the testimony, I just wanted some clarification as it related to what happens as a result of the purging, because I was pretty much the same opinion from what I know, that none of this ever really goes away and it can be retrieved. And so the question was more to what can you do with it if you can retrieve it? And I think it's pretty open-ended in reality, depending upon what comes down in the way of a court order, and a lot of that could be very, very valuable to us for a lot of different reasons, obviously, but it does raise a whole spectrum of abuse and the privacy issues and all of that, and the whole big brother concept that concerns a lot of people that we seem to be moving more and more towards. So that was the reason that I basically wanted to clear that up.
All right. Well, thank you. Senator Lowenthal, anything else on this issue? Thank you. Helpful in terms of sharing and understanding of what's both going on today and what's proposed. And I'll ask you again to work with committee staff. And at the risk of stating the obvious, that as chair, I have some pretty significant concerns about the privacy and civil liberties issues, but think that if everybody works in good faith, we ought to be able to find a way to make it work so that you can do your job and still respect those concerns.
Just had one other quick question.
Yes, Senator.
As it relates to the technology and where it is today, are you able to determine the speed of the vehicle as it passes the reader?
It does not capture that.
Okay. Is it possible to do that?
The system, to the best of my knowledge, no. It's not intended to in any way derive speed. It would need some type of secondary sensor, loop detector in the asphalt or something, but it's not designed to perform that function.
Okay. Another follow-up to that as it relates to the previous item we had, is this, the expansion of this system, has it been taken into consideration as it relates to your personnel request? Will this require you to, would you need fewer personnel if you had the expansion of this system, or is there any effect at all on that?
No, I don't think that we'd have fewer, because the way the system is set up, it's a secondary device to assist our officers. It's really a notification device, if you would. It's going to alert our officers that a vehicle just passed by this location. It's a wanted vehicle. It's an Amber Alert, and then it actually engages us then to go find it, because we're not right there where the device is, so they get a little head start, so to speak, and then we've got to go find it and make the appropriate arrest.
Does it compromise the effectiveness of the tool to provide public notice with signage that there is in fact a camera in place?
Our answer would be yes. The issue would be and I'm going to use we'll start with the child abduction, maybe one of the more serious. It was one of the reasons we went with fixed LPRs. It was done in conjunction as we took over the lead on the Amber Alert program. If you know the sensor exists only a few miles ahead, in most locations it would be pretty simplistic to exit, take a frontage road, bypass the sensor, and then get back on. So we would say there would be some compromise of the usefulness of the system.
Okay, I'm going to encourage you to chat with the staff about that issue, because one of the key privacy issues is whether or not members of the public know that they are under surveillance, essentially. All right, thank you very much. That takes us to item number 8, construction or renovation of the state-owned facilities. And we have some budget change proposals, 3, 4, and 5. And let me just ask LAO and the Department of Finance if the fund balance, given the action particularly on the transfer, is sufficient to allow these capital outlay projects to go forward.
At this time, based on the review of the January budget that the governor released, these capital outlay projects that are presented here are within the budget, and there is enough sufficient reserve to go forward on these that are here for this time.
Finance?
Right. We concur with that.
All right. Any other commentary from the patrol?
I would just add that we have some aging infrastructure with some of our facilities, and these are 3 of dire need. And there is already a significant capital investment from the state in working drawings and where we are so far. And we ask for your aye vote.
All right. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on this issue? And forgive me if I have neglected on any of these items to ask for public comment. If you would like to comment, that's certainly appropriate on any and all items, except the vote-only items. And even there, we'll take an item off vote only. So if I simply forget as we make our way through the agenda, please just stand and I'll figure out that something's going on. Anybody want to comment on this item? Senators Lowenthal and Cogdill. Senator Cogdill.
Just a quick question. I know in the past CHP has used a procedure where individual investors would develop a property and lease it back to the state for this type of operation. Is that still the policy, or are these owned by the state, developed and maintained by the state of California?
These would be capital outlay projects, so the state would own these projects, but most assuredly the patrol, working in conjunction with the Department of General Services and the Department of Finance, has and continues to look at leased-owned, leased-to-purchase facilities.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Senator Lowenthal.
We've heard recently from Caltrans of projects, construction projects coming in 25 to 30% under budget. Are you finding the same thing on these? Are these budgeted based upon reduction in construction costs that we've seen recently?
The Department of General Services assists the department in determining what the estimated construction costs are. They probably would be better at answering the questions. I can tell you from from my position, we have seen a reduction in overall construction costs. Given the state of the economy, one, we get more contractors bidding on the jobs than we've ever had before. That is good. The competition is good, and that drives down the cost. The other thing that we're well aware of is that materials have also decreased in cost, and the state is leveraging that. In the CHIPPERS program, the radio program that we spoke about earlier, we saw significant reductions from our early estimates going back 4 years ago from what we're actually building the sites for today. And in large part, that's a result of the economy and the fact that people need the jobs and they're willing to reduce their costs to obtain those jobs.
All right. Again, any member of the public on this item? All right. Well, then I think motion to approve the request. Motion by Senator Cogdill. Call a roll.
Simidian.
Aye.
Cogdill. Aye. Lowenthal.
Aye.
All right. Commissioner, I think that's the last item on the agenda that deals with the patrol. Just conclude by saying that we found it good to work with the patrol. Appreciate your openness and accessibility, and have always had a good working relationship with your legislative liaison as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you.
All right. That takes us to the next item. 2740, Department of Motor Vehicles. We're at page 10 of the published agenda. We have 4 vote-only items that are described on page 11 and 12. Is there anyone who would like to comment on those, or can we move straight to vote only? All right, then what I will do before I say, could I have a motion, please, is say, Senator Cogdill, good for you. Nice to see your Gold Star family license plates coming to fruition by this action, and I'll call for a motion to approve these 4 items on a vote only. Motion by Senator Cogdill. Call the roll.
Simidian.
Aye.
Cogdill. Lowenthal.
Aye.
All right. And then we will ask the folks from DMV to begin by introducing themselves. And I do have a question before we wade through the rest of the items here. Who's here?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Matt Paulin, Chief Deputy Director of the DMV.
Mr. Chairman, Dennis Clear, Legislative Officer, DMV.
Thank you. We had some conversation last year, back to privacy issues. We had some conversation last year about facial recognition software, and ultimately, based on a fairly extensive but not terribly conclusive conversation, the decision was made to sort of let that issue go by the boards. Where are we on that issue right now?
Where we are, Mr. Chair, is that we haven't proceeded with any form or fashion of facial recognition in conjunction with our DL ID card contract. The direction that we got from the legislature last year was pretty clear, and we've taken that direction seriously, so we haven't pursued that at all. I will tell you, though, that we continue to consider looking at the facial recognition technology and are continue to think about what that means for us and what we can do with that.
All right. So I just want to verify and hear from you very clearly that, consistent with current law, you will not be using facial recognition software now or anytime in the future unless you have legislative authority. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Great. Thank you. While we're in the general vicinity, we've had some conversations as well in the past about the use of RFID technology, radio frequency identification, in connection with the actual driver's license document. That's an issue where the chair has expressed some concern in the past. Forgive the third-person reference, colleagues. And where are we on those conversations as well?
We continue to have discussions about RFID, but we haven't proceeded towards the road of implementing RFIDs in any form or fashion.
All right. What's your understanding about whether or not you need legislative approval before you pursued such a path?
Before we pursue RFID?
Yeah, before 23 million California drivers have an RFID device in their license.
I would think that we would need some clear legislative direction on authority to move forward with using RFIDs in our driver's licenses or identification cards.
Okay. Could I ask you to clarify that with budget staff, please, in writing, And let's also look at the possibility of some budget language as well on this, not to preclude use, but just to ensure that, both, as I say, the concern I have is that there, that we not have a technology that's employed without some sunshine and some legislative authorization.
Absolutely.
Okay. On this set of privacy issues, Senator Lowenthal, anything? Senator Cogdill, anything? All right, ready to move on to other items then. Thank you. That takes us to item number 5, budget requests related to driving under the influence. We have budget change proposals number 8 and 10. And my understanding is that these requests are going to be, that these items are going to be funded with either federal funds or new fees on DUI violators. Is that correct? So we're not talking about general fund impacts here.
I don't know.
All right. LAO, Department of Finance, any take on these issues?
We have no issues with the request, and we agree with the staff recommendation.
Okay. Department of Finance? All right, good. Motion to approve would be in order unless there are questions. There may be questions. Senator Cogdill, any questions? No? Senator Lowenthal?
No?
Motion to approve?
Motion to approve the request.
Motion by Senator Lowenthal. Call the roll.
Simidian.
Aye.
Cogdill. Aye. Lowenthal.
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. Approved. And again, folks, if there are members of the public who wish to speak, and if I don't happen to remember to call out, please just stand up, raise your hand, walk towards the front. We'll be good. Capital outlay, construction or renovation of state-owned facilities. We've got a number of facilities that are specifically identified here. Same question that we asked earlier to both the LAO and the Department of Finance as a starting point. Is the fund balance of the motor vehicle account sufficient to allow these projects to go forward?
The fund balance is...
Okay, so that's not an issue in your judgments. Thank you. And then to the LAO, you've recommended that the request be reduced by $23.7 million. And if you could amplify on that recommendation, that would be helpful and spur some conversation, I'm sure.
Correct. From information that we received from the department in the beginning of January, their proceed to bid dates are closer to May 2011, as well as their estimated start dates for construction on the 3 projects for Oakland, Fresno, and Redding. Based on the timelines that we have here and where they are in the project phase of completion of their working preliminary plans phase and then going into their working drawings phase, we don't believe that they have sufficient enough justification to show why they need the construction funding this year. So we would say to approve the working drawings this year, and then we can proceed with the construction fundings in the next budget year.
Okay. Department of Finance, DMV, what's your take on that? Let me just recap and say, so the issue here is not one of the projects or their merit. The issue is entirely an accounting and calendar one.
Correct. Timing.
Okay.
Teresa Gunn, Department of Finance, and while the schedule that the LAO was looking at is based on a conservative estimate to try and assure we meet those timelines, the not funding the construction now would implement immediately a delay in those projects because we wouldn't be ready to move forward on our conservative schedule in May. Would not be the end of the world, but it would add an increased cost in the delaying of these projects. It also wouldn't allow them to move forward if they managed to move through working drawings on a more timely schedule than our most conservative estimate.
LAO, are you persuaded? How do you feel about that?
We've spoken with the department and their capital outlay personnel, and they've said it could possibly move it back a couple of months, 2 months at most, but they were comfortable with that in speaking with the department.
DMV.
Mr. Chair, we would be glad with just proceeding with these projects. If we could construction, so much the better, but if we could have working drawings, we would be pleased with that outcome as well. We'd just like to have these projects continue to move forward.
Meeting all 6 of the projects. Right. Okay. The chair is going to suggest that we authorize the 3 projects that, I believe it's 3, that are not in question and that are not part of the $23.7 million. But rather than deny the other 3, hold the item open for those 3 and let LAO and budget staff and DMV and finance sit down around the table together and see if we can get a little more consensus about what might or might not make sense. But I'm feeling a little bit like I'd be hard-pressed to make the judgment call today on those three projects. Senator Cogdill and then Senator Lowenthal.
Thank you very much. I'm willing to support your motion as you presented it. My personal position on it would be to go ahead and approve the 6 projects. I think we made a good argument earlier about the timing of construction in general and the opportunity to save money. And anytime you add delays, you're going to add additional costs. And if things do start to heat up here over the summer, then we may have more issues as it relates to costs that we could save if we, I think, just moved ahead at this point. But I think you've left the door open for that by leaving 3 of them open. So again, I'm willing to support your motion, but personally, I believe I ought to move forward on all of them.
Well, I'm still open. Senator Lowenthal, what's
No,
your
I
take?
too. My concern is that we still have adequate funding for the working drawings and everything else to move forward. Is that included? We're just delaying the actual construction dollars, not the other dollars. Is that not true?
LAO?
That's correct.
That's fine. Okay.
All right. Well, again, I think what I'd like to do is, do we have someone who wishes to speak? We do. Come forward. And if you'll borrow that microphone right there, please.
Stephanie Burry with SEIU Local 1000 representing the employees at DMV, and they are very supportive of moving these projects as quickly as possible because these facilities are disastrous and they really need better working conditions. So just
Thank you.
our point of view.
All right. I think here's what I'd like to do. As I mentioned earlier, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the 3 facilities and then come back on the other 3 altogether, hold the item open on those 3. And then the question I want to ask folks to talk about is, what's the downside of authorizing the additional funding at this point, if any? I don't want to try and answer that today, but if the answer is that it means that the money might still be in the account and we have to kick it over to the following year, that's not the end of the world. So let's just, if I can get a motion to move the 3 projects.
3 projects forward.
Thank you. And that is the projects that are listed but not.
That are ready for construction.
That's right, not the Oakland, Fresno, and Reading projects. Holding those items open. We're not, I want to be very clear with people, we're not denying those 3 projects. Call a roll.
Semidian.
Aye.
Cogdill. Aye. Lowenthal. Aye.
All right, look forward to seeing that one again. That takes us to item number 7, new facility leases for field offices. Okay. Similar to the previous issues, but these are leased rather than state-owned, back to an issue raised by Senator Cogdill and CHP. Department of Finance, DMV, any comments on this one? No?
Again, Mr. Chair, critical facilities projects. These facilities are very dated and need to be replaced. Appreciate an aye vote.
Okay, LAO? Fine on these. Public? All right. Is there someone who'd like to move the approval of the request?
Just a quick question.
Yes, sir.
These have before been approved for capital outlay projects, is that correct? And then the decision was made to go the lease route? Just wondering what the rationale for that.
Mr. Cogdill, once we looked at particularly Roseville and Fontana, we determined that those sites just really don't work for field offices. And so we really, in both instances, we're going to vacate those sites altogether. Roseville, for sure, we're going to surplus the property if we receive the approval to move forward. Fontana, we're thinking about can we reuse the facility in another way, but for the population and demographics of those geographical areas, they really just don't work for field offices. And that was upon additional deliberation and consideration we came to that conclusion.
The property that you're leasing, is this existing space or this new construction?
These are existing locations that we need new expanded facilities and parking.
Are they in existing shopping centers or?
I don't know if you've ever been in the Roseville field office. Roseville is in a shopping center. The site just doesn't work. It's a bi-level site. Our customers have to basically walk down a hill, take a long way around. A lot of customers take a shortcut. It's like a 4-foot drop. It just really doesn't work. The site, all these sites just don't work for field offices.
Might be good for the economy, boost a little foot traffic at the shopping center. You never know.
Maybe
Look at the
construction
revenue
jobs can
potential.
also be
There
a
you
boost
go.
to the economy, Mr. Chair.
All right.
Thank you.
Can we get a motion?
So move.
Thank you. Call roll.
Semidian.
Aye.
Cogdill. Aye. Lowenthal.
And the measure passes. I think that completes your items for today, yes? All right, we'll be in touch. Thank you very much. Office of Traffic Safety, this is item number 2700. Thank you. And we are at page 17 of our published agenda. Who's coming forward on this one? And the governor proposes total expenditures of $96.5 million and 34 positions, no general fund. And we've got a proposal for discussion that deals with DUI, driving under the influence checkpoints, and some issues about driver's license checks as well as vehicle seizures. Why don't we go ahead and begin? What would you like us to know about the program? And if you'd introduce yourselves both for the members of the committee and others who are here today.
Mr. Chairman, Senators, my name is Chris Murphy. I'm the Director of the California Office of Traffic Safety.
I'm Michelle Meadows, Assistant Director of Administration.
Bill Terrell, Office of Traffic Safety.
And was it Mr. Terrell? Did I get Terrell? Thank you. All right. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the program?
Senator, we fund sobriety checkpoints as part of an overall DUI effort, and we fund sobriety checkpoints statewide. Sobriety checkpoints are probably the most effective countermeasure known to combat DUI. We give out grants to local police departments and CHP to conduct sobriety checkpoints. We have educational programs. We have a lot of programs, but we do have an emphasis on sobriety checkpoints because they have shown to be so effective.
Okay. And what's the proposal for the coming year going forward?
In the current year, we're funding about 2,500 sobriety checkpoints, and that includes CHP and local law enforcement. And so and we also do DUI saturation patrols. We have programs with probation departments. We fund 6 DUI-only courts, DUI vertical prosecution programs. We're in the schools doing the Every 15 Minutes program, bringing real DUI trials to schools, involved with the Ignition Interlock program with DMV that we're funding. So we're heavily involved in all DUI countermeasures.
Okay. I think there's no denying the importance of the mission, and that being said, there are some other issues that have been raised that I want to walk through, and before we can walk through those, I think it would be helpful if we had a slightly clearer understanding of what to you is probably everyday information, but which may not be part and parcel of our daily work. So let me start with a fairly simple question. Where does the money come from that funds these efforts?
It comes from the Department of Transportation. These are federal funds.
Okay. And then how do you make the decision to allocate these? You mentioned that there are a number of partners that you have, or I guess they're grant recipients. Is that
Correct.
fair?
Correct.
Okay. So who gets to participate? How is that judgment made?
We send out an RFP every year to about 3,000 different agencies, law enforcement, health departments, traffic engineering departments, and they submit proposals to us. We have an exhaustive process. It's a competitive process, and then we award the grants, working with BTH. And we also have one of the things that we've done is 2 years ago we identified the top 31 DUI cities in the state and asked them to maybe do more sobriety checkpoints because they're so effective. Those top 31 cities did, I think, about 200 more checkpoints than they had done the year before. This last year, we expanded the list to have the top 50 DUI cities in the state and asked them to conduct more sobriety checkpoints.
Is that list of cities publicly available?
Mm-hmm.
Could we get a copy of that if we don't already have a
Sure,
copy?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Is there any requirement or suggestion in the federal funding that the funds for DUI checkpoints be used for driver's license checks as distinct from DUI checks?
There is a recommendation from the federal government in several documents that is a way to maybe determine whether people are okay to drive. The divided attention task, which is having someone look for their driver's license, maybe extends a conversation with the officer. So that's which is part of the issue.
So the recommendation is not, while it's focused on the driver's license, the purpose of the recommendation is not to discern whether somebody has a driver's license that's current and valid, but to engage them in a task which helps the officer assess their suitability for driving?
Well, I think that's part of it, but the other part of it is people should be licensed to drive, and that's the other part. So it's divided attention, but also to make sure that the person is properly licensed.
Let me stop here for a minute and say that's we're at the crux again here. Is that the purpose? We've got federal funds.
Right.
Are the federal funds for a DUI check, or are they for the purpose of stopping folks and saying we want to see your license?
The funds are not earmarked specifically for the driver's license piece. The funds aren't even earmarked specifically for DUI checkpoints. But the understanding is that sobriety checkpoints, because they're so effective, that states should be using sobriety checkpoints.
So what are the funds earmarked for?
Why
don't you take a deep breath and relax? This is going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, no, this is good.
We're going to share information. We're going to have a better understanding. It's all good.
Earmarked for DUI programs. Could be, as I mentioned, DUI courts. They could be for.
But is it specific to DUI, or is it for highway safety more generally, or is there a shopping list of things that it says it's appropriate to use the funds for?
We use money that we have only for DUI to fund our sobriety checkpoint program.
So the money does come from Washington saying, this is money that we're giving the state of California for use in sobriety checkpoints or for DUI efforts. Is that
exactly?
Okay. Has the question ever been raised whether or not there is authority in either state or federal law to do driver's license checks using these funds, or has that just been sort of a standard operating procedure over the years?
Well, there was a case in, I think, in the Fourth Circuit that came out last November out of North Carolina that upheld the driver's license only checkpoint. Now we, the Office of Traffic Safety, we do not fund driver's license only checkpoints. But there has been some case law. We started doing this in 1996. The Attorney General then really prodded us and said, look, if you're going to fund sobriety checkpoints, you need to be looking at driver's licenses. And that was the official position of the Attorney General then. And so
Sorry, would you just repeat that remark? I literally just didn't track it because I was taking notes on your earlier comments. So just say it again, please.
The Attorney General in 1996.
California Attorney General?
Yes.
Okay.
Said, look, the official position is that if you're going to do sobriety checkpoints, you should combine a driver's license check with sobriety checkpoints. And so based on that, and he said there was ample case law to support a dual-purpose checkpoint. So based on that, we developed a policy that encouraged departments to look at driver's licenses during sobriety checkpoints. However, we did not mandate that they had to. It's up to each local department to decide whether they want to look at driver's license at sobriety checkpoints.
And thank you. This is all helpful. Maybe this is a question for Trivial Pursuits. Remind me who the Attorney General was in 1996, please.
Dan Lundgren.
Mr. Lundgren. Okay, thank you. And was this in the form of a formal AG's opinion or a directive, or?
It was. I have a couple of documents here, and I don't have the whole thing.
Let me ask you, we don't need to do this today.
Sure.
But just by way of follow-up, I think what I'd like to do is, if you can work with staff so we can get a copy of that November 2009 Fourth Circuit opinion that you described, as well as whatever written direction there might have been from the Attorney General in 1996. I think all that would be helpful information. Are there any guidelines that that outline these DUI checkpoint procedures when the funds go forward, or are we looking at each of the grant recipients doing their own thing?
Ingersoll versus Palmer, which is our Supreme Court case here that came out in 1987, was very explicit in how sobriety checkpoints should be set up. CHP has also come out with protocol, and local law enforcement has protocol. So how to set up a sobriety checkpoint, what location to choose, how it should be publicized, all of that is very clearly spelled out in Ingersoll versus Palmer.
Okay. And we'll ask staff to work with you to identify those issues as well. Did OTS adopt driver's license inspection as a best practice? Is that part of your own?
Well, this really came from the Attorney General. He very strongly worded letter was really surprised that we had not changed our policy to allow for the funding of that.
This is still in the 96.
Right. December 19th, 1996. So from that, we adopted a policy in 1997 that said we would fund dual checkpoints if a department wanted to, but we didn't make any condition for funding.
Let me just ask, staff, have we seen that policy that was promulgated pursuant to the Attorney General's letter?
I don't believe so.
Okay, then if we could ask you to share that with committee
Absolutely.
staff, that would be helpful as well. And then before I go to the other members and offer a comment, how do you measure the success of this program? Do we have a metric that we can use?
Well, one of the things since we started increasing sobriety checkpoints really in 2005, DUI deaths have plummeted here in California. And even though one is one too many, we've had about a 20% drop since 2005. And I believe when the 2009 numbers come out, it could be down another 10% or so. Sobriety checkpoints work. There are more studies on the effectiveness of sobriety checkpoints than almost any traffic safety countermeasure out there.
But you're not able to specifically link the checkpoints to that decline.
It is a contributing factor. I would absolutely.
I sympathize with you on this. At one level, as the author of the hands-free bill here in California, we saw a dramatic decline in highway fatalities and collisions in the immediate aftermath of the passage of the law. That has not allowed me to persuade every one of my colleagues of the effectiveness of the law. And this is the causality and the relationship. There may be a constant struggle on that front, but. All right, let me just ask one more question. You have a competitive grant process. Is the intention of the local applicant to do driver's license checks criteria for the competitive grant? In other words, if I've got one applicant and I've got another applicant, and this one specifically says they're going to do driver's license checks, and the other applicant is in every other way identical, is this applicant benefited in the competition by indicating to you that the driver's license check is going to be part of the process?
Actually, and I'm trying to think back, I don't know that many departments, if any, actually want to do sobriety checkpoints without doing the driver's license check. So I'm not sure that even comes up. I have had one department call us probably a couple of months ago and said, would that impact them on the new proposal if they didn't want to look at driver's licenses? And we said absolutely not.
So it's not a part of any written scoring criteria, for example?
No.
Okay. I've got a comment I'm going to offer, but first I'm going to see if there are questions from either of the two members.
Yes.
Senator Lowenthal.
Yeah. You mentioned it, and maybe I just didn't understand. At the very beginning, when you seek those that want these grants for the sobriety checkpoints, that you send out the applications to a variety of agencies, and it seemed to me in listening that there were more than just law enforcement agencies. Can you tell me who is able to receive a grant Is it just law enforcement, or what about those other agencies? And who can do a sobriety checkpoint?
Only law enforcement can do a sobriety checkpoint, but we have grants with traffic engineers, we do school programs, basically.
Same funding source?
Well, same funding source, maybe a different pot, because some of our pots of money aren't dedicated just to DUI. So we have general money that we could use for, say, a traffic records program. We could use for an occupant protection program. So health departments receive our RFP. But they have to be a governmental agency. We can only directly fund a governmental agency.
Now, as one who's seen and been participated in sobriety checkpoints as I've driven along, especially in Southern California on Pacific Coast Highway, what does this money pay for? I'm an law enforcement agency. I was going to, if I'm not receiving this grant, am I not going to be doing a sobriety checkpoint? Are there those that use their resources to do sobriety checkpoints without these grants? I mean, what is the relationship between receiving a grant and doing a sobriety checkpoint?
We pay for the overtime.
The
overtime for sobriety checkpoints, they're usually run, say, from, well, number one, our checkpoints that we fund have to start after 6 o'clock at night. So unless there's a special case, we may have a special case where there's maybe someone is near a lake or something and they're having a lot of problems with DUI from people leaving. We may allow for a daytime, but that's the only case.
So they're evening, they're after
Evening,
6 o'clock.
usually 6 o'clock to 2 or maybe 8 to 3, something of that nature. And so they're generally done on overtime, which is where the Office of Traffic Safety comes in. And many local law enforcement agencies obviously are financially strapped, and so that's where the Office of
Are there
Traffic
agencies out there that provide sobriety checkpoints without seeking governmental additional funds?
Senator, that's a really good question, and I'm not sure. I believe, and this is just anecdotally, that we fund most of the sobriety checkpoints in California, but I don't know that to be a fact.
It would be helpful for me to understand whether, in fact, there are agencies that are doing it without. Now, it may not be possible to get that data. I understand,
We'll see
but
what we
it would
can
be
do.
very helpful to understand that, whether it's just for these grants that we're doing sobriety checkpoints, or whether other agencies are doing it with their existing resources.
Absolutely, we will.
Senator Cochran?
Thank you. A couple of questions. Do you have more applicants for grants than you have dollars to spread around, and by what degree?
We funded last year overall, and I'm not exactly sure of this number off the top of my head. I want to say 60% of the applicants that submitted, we funded. So sometimes it's not so much about the funds we have. It might be what they're asking for. They might not have the kind of traffic safety problem that warrants what they're asking for. We're very performance-based, and we like to do things that work. We only do things that work.
Right.
So that is a big part of how we decide who gets funded.
Heather, if you could walk me through the process, for whatever reason, I've never experienced the checkpoint situation, so it's hard for me to understand how we're stopping someone for anything and not asking for a driver's license before we do anything else. So again, how do you? I'm assuming once you've determined you're going to test someone, or after they've failed the test, at some point you're going to ask for their driver's license. I'm assuming.
The way this works, when you are screened at the screening part, the officers, have you had anything to drink tonight? You have to show your driver's license then. So, and then if you don't have a driver's license, then you need, the car is pulled over to somewhere else, and there's an investigation done, and they see.
Okay, so is a distinction here that we're talking about setting up checkpoints just to check driver's licenses? And you're telling me that as part of a sobriety test, we do look for driver's licenses automatically?
No. Well, this is a sobriety checkpoint, and when you pull up to where the officer is, he wants to see, have you had anything to drink? He's also going to ask to see your driver's license.
Okay.
Is that kind of?
I'm a little confused as to. I was under the impression that maybe that wasn't something that you automatically asked for.
Yes, it is. In most I would say most sobriety checkpoints, at least the ones that we fund, that's how law enforcement does
Senator
it.
Cockle, excuse the interruption, but let me try and provoke a little lively conversation here. El Camino Real, the Kings Highway, up and down the San Francisco Peninsula, busy commercial district, lots of stores, but also lots of restaurants, drinking establishments. I think there was a stop in Menlo Park that I participated in some years ago. And here's the question. Should perfectly law-abiding citizens be stopped in substantial numbers and asked to produce a driver's license and identification, essentially show their papers, when there is no probable cause whatsoever to believe that they have engaged in any unlawful conduct? And that is happening by the thousands.
But that's already the presumption with any DUI checkpoint, right?
Well, I mean, the DUI checkpoint, however, is narrowly focused, because one of the issues here is if you're going to stop people, and each of us will have our own judgments about this, which is why I wanted to provoke the conversation. DUI checkpoints, in my view, are number one, saying there may be a clear and present danger to the safety and well-being of the public, and we're going to, with that very significant concern in mind, we're going to narrowly focus on making sure that people who are here are not driving under the influence. And hopefully, by having a DUI checkpoint, we will both find and take people off the roads if they're under the influence, and also, because these are usually well announced, will deter people from being under the influence. I think that's the theory. That is an important task, and one which I support. That is, however, a little bit different than saying thousands of law-abiding citizens who've given no indication whatsoever and for whom there is no probable cause to believe that they're engaging in any unlawful activity, including driving under the influence, are asked to show their driver's license. And that's the crux of this debate. And I think, some will argue, well, if you're going to stop somebody, why wouldn't you ask for their driver's license? Others would argue, wait a minute, I thought the mission here was to deal with driving under the influence. Why is this suddenly turned into essentially a stop of any and all members of the public for a check of their papers, quote unquote? Which,
well, it seemed to me it's a public safety issue. It's about making sure that people that are impaired as a result of their drinking aren't out there endangering the rest of us. And I think you could certainly extend that to those that are driving without a license that haven't been tested by our system as it relates to their ability to operate the vehicle or to understand our laws. So,
which leads to an interesting question. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you want to give an answer, I'd be here. Would you be comfortable saying we're going to have driver's license checkpoints, the purpose of which is to simply stop people as they move through the community and say, I need to see if you have a driver's license?
Yes, I think if circumstances warranted, if the situation was similar to what we're experiencing with drunk drivers, and I think it is, as it relates to folks that don't have the knowledge to appropriately operate a motor vehicle in this state, then yeah. But I think that would have to be established as the drunk driving criteria has been established. There's a good reason why we do that, and I think there's every bit as good a reason to check for driver's licenses.
Senator, if I may add,
well,
Sorry,
I'd like to follow up on that in this comment. I cannot conceive of a police officer stopping you and not asking for your driver's. I just can't conceive of that ever happening.
Registration.
I'd like to understand. And once we allow for the sobriety checkpoint, I just cannot conceive a police officer at that point not asking for your driver's. I mean, I'm not saying that I don't understand the issues that you're raising, but I can never imagine that not happening. Now, maybe we need to deal with that issue. I'm not sure, but I think that I would have just expected that an officer would want to, once you stop, you are required to have a driver's license to operate that vehicle, and I don't think it's checking papers or doing anything else. Once you're stopped by a sobriety checkpoint, I just can't imagine that officer not asking.
How about a smog check while we're at it, Senator?
We're not talking about police officers. We're talking about police officers. They do not do smog checks. That's why I asked who's allowed to do this.
I'm going to keep pushing on my colleagues here a little bit as well.
I think under our law, they do stop people if they believe your vehicle is...
That's a police officer now, right? Yeah, right. A smog check that's not done by a police officer.
But the key phrase there was, if you believe.
Cite you if they think you're over polluting, right?
Then again, the question is if you believe, which means you have some cause to believe that someone is polluting. I got a couple more questions about how this program works, but I want to weave together a couple conversations we've had today. So, pretty casually, as a state and as a culture, we're talking about having 100 mobile cameras at the CHP to track and store for some period of time the movements of law-abiding citizens up and down the highways of the state. Pretty casually, we're talking about a DMV that wants facial recognition software and that has proposed in the past RFID technology that broadcasts personal information from a driver's license. And pretty casually, we're talking about stopping people who have given no indication whatsoever that they're in violation of the law and asking to see their papers. Put all that together, and I think you have to start asking yourself, are we asleep at the switch on sort of these privacy and civil liberties issues? Now, the question is, so if somebody doesn't have a driver's license, let's start with somebody who's absolutely sober, there's no issue with DUI, is asked for a driver's license, and is told he should produce his driver's license, and he says, oh my gosh, I left my wallet at home. What happens next? Can the vehicle be seized? Must the vehicle be seized?
Our vehicle impound law says someone has to have never been issued a license. So if you have one and you don't have it with you, that's different.
And can the officer ascertain that on the spot?
I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I would think so. I'm not exactly sure. Senator, if I might add, and I think one of the things that about 35% of all the vehicles that are impounded at sobriety checkpoints are people that have a suspended or revoked license. And we know that these people 11 times more likely to be arrested for DUI. I mean, the stats just go on and on, not only with unlicensed drivers being overrepresented in crashes, but suspended and revoked people, multiple offenders. We have criminals. There are so many things that...
Follow up to Senator Simitian's question then, what percentage of those folks didn't have a DUI issue? They weren't drunk at that point or under the influence, but their car, because they didn't have the license, was impounded. Is there...
Well, I mean, it is not too uncommon to have a sobriety checkpoint where maybe you make 3, 4, 5 arrests, even though arrests are not what gauge the effectiveness of a sobriety checkpoint, and you may impound 20 or 30 vehicles, and maybe half are unlicensed and half are suspended and revoked. But we have 1.3 million
So those
people
arrests can be for a number of things?
in terms of...
Well, assume you pull someone, or they come into the checkpoint for the sobriety, but you find out there's a warrant out for them, or it's a stolen car, or whatever.
Absolutely.
Again, you're going way beyond just the issue of sobriety.
But I
And
mean,
we do
law
that on-
enforcement... excuse me, Senator.
I'm just saying, we do that, it sounds like.
Law enforcement, if there is a crime, there have been murder suspects that have come through. I mean, they have a responsibility if they see something to do something. I mean, to let a crime go by, and I mean, this is really the main object is DUI, and that's really what this is about.
Cost of recovering the cars these days when they're taken?
I've seen some numbers thrown about, partly accurate, partly not. One of the things that needs to be taken into account that many people that are have their cars impounded that are unlicensed, while their car can be impounded for 30 days, usually they're not. We did a survey. Well, UC Berkeley did a survey, the Traffic Safety Center, and they surveyed 40 different agencies, and 31 of the 40 released the cars early. We've heard that the city of Santa Ana, they release 80% of their vehicles that they impound for unlicensed drivers early. So the cost could be $1,000, could be a couple $100, but this is a local issue. Locals set the policy, and I'm sure each department has a policy that may be a little bit different.
So is that because under the law the maximum is 30 days?
Yes.
Okay, so they do have that latitude to
Absolutely.
All right, Senator Lowenthal, any other
No, I think
questions?
we have really
Exhausted this issue.
not exhausted it. I think highlighted the key issues that are involved. I think there are significant issues that need to be discussed. I don't think we'll always agree upon how we resolve those, but I think that there are. And I think that we have done that, and I thank the chair for doing it.
All right. Senator Cogdill, last call.
I just would move the recommendation.
Senator Cogdill, I'm going to ask that we just hold this item open
All right.
until we get a little more information on these issues. And I'm going to ask, and thank you, Senator Cogdill, I understand that you're in a somewhat different place and respect that. But I am going to ask the folks at OTS to work with committee staff to clarify some of these issues of clarity of mission, I guess is what I'll call them, and then also the work to pull together some of these resources that you've cited in terms of California case, the federal case, the communication from the Attorney General, and with particular interest on whether the Attorney General's communication is essentially a binding direction in some way, shape, or form, or simply the opinion of an individual AG who is no longer in that role. All right. Any last comments from you all? Mr. Terrell, Ms. Meadows? Got away clean, didn't you? Okay. Mr. Murphy, thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right,
Senators.
thank you.
Chair, are we going to take a little break at this moment?
Suggestions been made that we take a break, and Senator Cogdill, I know you've got some
grab a
scheduling
sandwich.
I
challenges.
do. I was just wondering if we might be able to take the vote-only item up
Fine.
before we
Sure.
break.
Why don't we do that? Why don't we let folks clear out, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to take, we've got a request for a break so that members can answer a few phone calls, maybe grab a quick sandwich, but Senator Cogdill's asked if we could take the one item that is a vote only on a technical issue relating to high-speed rail, and I don't have any objections to that unless there's anyone who wants to testify on that one narrow issue. I don't see anyone. Then what we'll do is this is on page 20 of the agenda. We'll ask for a motion.
So moved.
Motion by Lowenthal, and we'll call the roll.
Semidian,
Aye.
Cogdill,
No.
Lowenthal.
All right, that passes on 2-1 vote. Folks, we're going to take a break. Senators, I'm thinking it's 12:19. Can we get back by 1:15?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Just gonna grab
I'm mindful that we don't want to keep folks who've already been waiting a while much any longer than we have to while we still need a break. We're going to recess until 1:45, at which time we will come back. We will then take public testimony that is relevant to any or all of the items under the high-speed rail agenda item. Then we will work our way through item by item the items that are on the agenda. Without objection, we are in recess.